Hi, everyone. I know it's after lunch. And of course, people will be trickling in, but let's start on time so we can finish on time and not take time for the next session. My name is Jeanette Stewart, and I'm the founder of Translation Commons. And we're here with Tex to speak to you about the UNESCO World Atlas of Languages. First, I want to give you a very small overview, very, very brief, about Translation Commons and how we got involved with the World Atlas. First of all, Translation Commons is a volunteer community of language technologists that's been going on since 2014. In 2019, at the International Year of Indigenous Languages, we became a partner with UNESCO. We were asked to do one event. We did 32 in the year. That put us on the map for UNESCO. So we created the Language Digitization Initiative. And through this, we had an advisory board that created online conferences, guidelines, how to digitize. We call the series Zero to Digital. It involves data gathering, it involves terminology and all sorts of other things. You heard from Tex about the keyboard project, and we're also trying to create templates and other language technology tools for Indigenous communities. And between 2019 and 2022, we participated in the creation of the Global Action Plan with UNESCO, providing the language technology expertise. And of course, the decade of the Indigenous languages is from 2022 to 2032, and we are a language technology partner for language technology for UNESCO. So now in 2024, we were asked to participate in the recreation of the World Atlas of Languages. And this is what we'll be talking on this session. However, I do want to point out that what we do as an organization is that we work with international agencies on their projects, on this occasion, the Indigenous languages, and we also work with the Indigenous communities. We kind of handhold them through the processes, you know, explaining how technology for language works and, you know, introducing them to different organizations and people. And of course, everything starts with a script, but for us, it's not just the script. I'm not going to go into detail on this workflow, but basically, we help them not just for the script, but for the language, for the education, for the language professionals, how to create translators, how to create associations of translators. For example, in Zambia, we did how to create online educational material for K-12, which is open source. So various Indigenous communities in Africa can take the, 6 UN languages, the dominant languages, and translate it into their own language. So we provide whatever resources we can to all these Indigenous communities that need language technology and need to be able to be digitally enabled. So that was about Translation Commons. And now I want to go into the World Atlas of Languages. How many of you have already seen the World Atlas of Languages of 5 years ago on the UNESCO website? What did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Exactly. So we all felt the same thing. But let me just give you a little bit of a brief history before. In 1993 was the beginning of the Endangered Languages Program with UNESCO. That, by 1996, that became the Atlas of the World Languages in Danger of Disappearing, which was a publication. And that included 12 pages of maps, okay? Now, fast forward to 2001, we have the second edition, and you can see the publication logo there. And they were managing to do, by this time, lists region by region, and they had about 800 endangered languages. In 2008, they have the third publication, and by this time, they started realizing the importance of Indigenous languages, the importance of organizing and getting to know more things. And that is when the UN declared the International Year of Indigenous Languages to be in 2019. So now in 2002, they decided, okay, let's do an online pilot to see if we can transfer the publication to be online. So they started with 100 endangered African languages. And by 2014, we reached the World Atlas of Languages the way you know it, the few of you who had visited the site. It had a few problems. It did get a new title, so it went from the endangered languages into the World Atlas of Languages, just to keep it shorter. Now, in order to get the data for this, they had various surveys. These surveys were addressed to governments, it was addressed to universities, academics, Indigenous communities themselves, and all sorts of statistical data and offices. So this also was recording and visualizing the data on maps. In 2021, on Christmas Day, the server broke, and that was it. They decided we're not gonna recreate it. So since then, there has been efforts to revive the idea of the Atlas, but make it different. So now we have the beta version, which is available today. So you can all go online and see it. And I will give you some more information about this. Sorry, this is moving. Okay. The current version has two dimensions. It caters for languages, so you can sort out and search per language, and it gives you various information, or it sorts out and searches through countries, and it can give you information about the languages spoken in each country. And the information at this point is, I want to tell you about the country profiles. Each country profile can have multiple languages, of course, and it is all controlled by the focal point. The focal point on this occasion is not inanimate, it's a person. So the focal point gets appointed by the member state and is responsible to reach out to whoever they need to reach out to get the data they need. No, it's not. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Now, of course, the vision at the moment is to have a seamless, accessible information portal about the world's languages. The next sentence about the mission, I'm not even going to read it to you. It is written in a foreign language called UNESCO language. It has to have at least 15 segments, and it has to be each sentence at least 5 lines. So, but you can understand. Now, the WAL team. The World Atlas of Languages consists of the UNESCO communication. Thank you. The UNESCO Communication and Information Sector team. There are about 4 or 5 people in this team that are helping, and also it is being overseen by the 12-member ad hoc expert committee, of which I am also part of. I was invited and appointed in April 2024. So the strategy goals for the development of this new atlas is, of course, to have an authoritative platform. This is extremely important for UNESCO because their main objective is that policymakers will be able to make policy decisions in their countries depending on the language use in their countries. So the focal points have to find it easy to navigate, have to find it easy to be able to add data, and have to be able to validate the data. They also want to have make sure that everybody who visits has a great user experience. So of course, it's not just the people who use it, the focal points and the governments, but it's also the visitors. So they want to incorporate feedback and make sure that any other research findings is also incorporated. And finally, the most difficult of all is how to validate the data so it is credible. And of course, that means that they need to cite all the sources and they need to have regular updates of the data. The user groups are by far the most important for the creation of the atlas at the moment is the policymakers, government officials and public institutions that need to have the specific language usage data. But we also have academics and researchers. We have indigenous communities themselves or the minority groups that are interested in the data or provide even the data, but they see how they compare and how, the information, is used. Finally, international agencies and NGOs and language professionals and technologists. As we know, we deal with all languages all the time. And of course, the general public that want to know information about languages. This is the North Star, according to the WAL team, of what kind of information they should have. Of course, it's very, very small print, so I have increased the size a little bit. It's very difficult to read, and there isn't a sequence. This is just a prototype. It's not a finalized version, but you can see that there is the example is in Kiswahili, and we have from, overview of the language, which consists of number of speakers. It consists of even Unicode resources, translation tools, the writing system information, and so on. And then the other part of the North Star has linguistic data, keyboard layout, open source dictionaries, language learning resources, community and collaboration. All of these have been added, but they need to be reworked. So gathering data. The focal points that are appointed by each government are responsible to complete the World Atlas of Languages questionnaire. Okay, so we're going to get back to the questionnaire quite a lot in this presentation. So the selection is done by the governments, and it is very important for the team, which is the UNESCO team and the expert committee, to make sure that the focal points that are being appointed are trained, are, have the expertise. The governments know where to go and find focal points. So, for example, statistical offices, academic institution, and so on. We also want to train them, and we also want to guide them. So we want to create some videos, some instructions, have some tips on how to find data. We considered doing a pre-filled questionnaire that will have the available data, and all they have to do is validate or add the missing data. And also we're considering a help desk. And finally, we want to make sure that all the sources that are being used are all recorded, so we have the tracking. At the moment, of all the member states of UNESCO, we have 74 countries that have not appointed a focal point. And I'm pointing this out to see that it's very early stages at the moment. We have 48 countries that have focal points, but they haven't collected the data yet. So we need to help these focal points now understand how to collect the data, because if they haven't done it, it's probably because they don't know how to. We have 33 countries that have some data available. That is why we said maybe a pre-filled questionnaire, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, although we have 44 countries that have fully validated data, only 6 of them have updated the data regularly on an annual basis. The vitality levels that are used in this questionnaire, in this entire atlas, are based on number of users. And this is something that the ad hoc expert committee also wants to revisit to make sure that it's not just the number of people speaking it, but it has the continuity element that Tex was speaking earlier today. And we have a questionnaire. This questionnaire has been going on from 2020. It is 58 pages. Out of these 58 pages, a couple of them is the information on who is answering the questionnaire. Because if you remember, I mentioned originally the questionnaire was answered by anybody. It could be an Indigenous community, it could be a member of the public, an NGO, or whoever. So this is now becoming redundant because we only have the focal points that are answering this questionnaire. The second part, which is the bulk of the questions, is 30 pages repeated twice. The first 30 pages are for spoken languages and written. And the second 30 pages or less, actually, it's for sign languages. So they repeat the questions, only, the ones that are relevant for sign languages. This questionnaire is obsolete, and it's currently being revised by the expert committee. We hope to be able to have something published by 2025, and Tex will be talking about some of these revisions in his section. And what is the elephant in the room? What is missing from all of this that we have said? You wouldn't know it, but I can tell you, of all these 58 pages on this questionnaire, there are about 2 questions on digitization. The first question is there an ISO code? And the second question is, are there online resources? That is all they say for the language. So our job now is to correct that, and Tex will take us through.
Thank you, Jeanette. Any questions so far? Okay.
Oh, Peter has a question.
Why don't you come up?
Yeah.
Since
when you said like six countries have provided up to date, 44 have provided complete.
Yeah.
So you had that earlier slide with Kiswahili for all these different categories of information, but that's one axis. The other axis being the count of languages. So when you say like 44 with complete data, what does that actually mean?
So the 44 complete data countries have answered the entire questionnaire. The questionnaire is the old questionnaire.
Yeah.
We're still going to revise it in order to be able to have all the North Star information, which we don't have right now in the questionnaire.
Or what they...
For each language.
For each language that the government recognizes as a distinct language.
That's a very good point. And that's why one of the things is that they're not using maps anymore because it's a political issue. So the recognition of the languages is where the expert committee is going to come in and say, no, we need to have XYZ languages, whether you approve them or not. And we will have some problems.
And I also had a question, and maybe Tex will get to this, that scale of viability. I wondered, like, why not just use the EGID scale, which is what ethno uses.
Hold on to that thought. Let me tell you what we're proposing. But I'm glad you raised all of the ambiguity around these things. So as we go through this, don't chew me up because we have to make some decisions, right? So what we're talking about is gathering metrics for language digitization. And we have to think about, well, how can we assess it? So we have some goals. Jeanette alluded to some of these. We need to have some definitions so that people can understand clearly what is intended, how to answer the questions. We need very simple questions that can be answered accurately. And we're focused on gathering data that will be useful for language policy making. In particular, would like to address, because we're just focusing on the language technology, not all the rest of the survey, data that is being collected, but just on language technology, we'd like to know at least for this language, where are they on a digitization workflow or process? Where are they and what do they need to do next, or what kind of support do they need next? And of course, having the data, we want to be able to support search and filtering, to visualize the data as you explore it, and to have some kind of intelligent analysis tools for all of the kinds of users that may come to visit the website and see the data. Also, we don't want to have to go through individually, have people assigned to categorizing the language support. So we're trying to make it so that it can be automated. And we also want to be able to monitor the progress of data gathering. Who's gathered data, what data have they gathered, who's not gathering data, and so forth. And be able to look at, credibility and validation, things like that. So now, there are a number of challenges around this. First of all, when is a language? Or what language is it? Is it unique? Is it distinct from other languages? And then to kind of assess where it stands. And digitization is a lengthy process, and it's not a linear process. You have many different axes, whether it's available in standards, whether you have the character set, whether all of it's encoded in Unicode or not, what the orthography is all of this. And sometimes it moves forward. You might have a keyboard that uses proprietary characters and character encoding. Do you say that, okay, they have language support in a keyboard, or do you wait for the Unicode support to be there and then the keyboard for that hits some level of digitization? When you're dealing with proprietary encodings, there may only be a few communities that can use it, not language communities, but maybe just a newspaper uses it, and other groups can't type with it, and so forth. So, and then the answers are not obvious. You can have community members, language experts, language or community advocates. They might all have disagreements. Those of you who follow the Unicode process, you can see even when we're encoding the script, you get people with different kinds of interests. So that is challenging. And then, of course, it's also not clear every part of the digitization process. It tends to be many to many, right? So you can have a script that supports multiple languages. You can have a keyboard that supports multiple languages. But is it complete support? Is it enough? Is it a transliteration? Am I typing in Latin to get the language that I want? So we want to assess the language. We want to do the best we can in a world filled with all sorts of gray areas, because humanity is diverse and has diverse opinions. So here's a Venn diagram. It's my creation. Phases of digitization is not something official, but let me just kind of walk you through. Do we know what this language is? Can we describe it in a way that we know what we're talking about? Does it have a character set and so forth? With that definition, is it recognized? Does ISO have a language tag for it? Does Unicode encode all of its characters? So and once we have that, well, I shouldn't say once. I intentionally did not put arrows on this diagram because, as I said, it's not a linear process. Is there some kind of initial implementation with keyboard and font, and I can type something? And once I have an implementation, can I contribute online language and locale data? And then from there, might actually be able to produce apps. So at a high level, that's kind of the way I think about it. And then here are the specifics. And well, I shouldn't say specifics. Here are some attributes. And this is going to be the basis for the questions that we ask. Does the language have a name? Does it have a character set? Do we know what the script is? Do we know something about orthography? Very importantly, do we have usage examples? because those usage examples will contribute to the recognition and standards process. Often, any of the standards groups like ISO or Unicode will want to see examples so they can know that they're defining something that is not like momentarily invented and just somebody is just trying to create a language as opposed to referencing one that's actually in existence. And then for implementation, keyboard, font, maybe usable in a messenger, so at least at a minimal level, people can communicate with it and do some basic editing. And then we proceed, online dictionaries, locale data, is it in CLDR? And then are there office tools, social apps, translation tools, right? So with that kind of thought process, we created categories. Now we're going to ask all of those questions, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the survey questions in a minute. But the way this works is we'll assign very high-level categories, and instead of trying to uniquely answer them, we just have thresholds, right? If you can't type, display, and exchange text using standardized technologies, you're still in the none phase. Okay, means you either have no digitization or it's proprietary or people are working on it. And then once you get to basic, then we can start to ask about application support, whether or not they have a localized user interface, spell checkers, and so forth. Then it becomes supported. And then, of course, there can be an advanced category. You've got machine translation, natural language processing tools, and so forth. So those are really big jumps, but it's a start. And as we get some experience and we get answers to the questions, we might put some refinement to those categories, but you get the idea. Okay, so all of the questions, now, as Jeanette mentioned, we go through focal points who then reach out to other experts and people to collect the data. We wanted to keep the answers accurate and to be accessible. And so we just wanted yes/no questions as a primary contribution to the categories. So we can automate what category a language is in. There are going to be additional options. People can add more information, long text or other supplementary information. But to automate the categorization, we wanted to have yes/no questions that can be well defined, well understood, and so we can trust the answers. And of course, we'll provide instructions. And as I mentioned, it's based on passing a threshold determines what category you're in. The nice thing about having these categories, though, is if you're in the none section, we have all of the answers to these questions. We can identify what is needed for that language to move to basic or to move from basic to supported. Because they may have some, but not all of what they need. So, how am I doing on time? Okay. So I'm not going to read through all of the questions. Most of you who work in this space could probably guess. There are things like, does it have an ISO language tag? Is there a script tag? Can it be typed and displayed in a native script versus typed and displayed but in a non-native script? Is it encoded? Did this just repeat?
Yeah. Actually, no.
Oh, it was just slow to move?
I think your first question is garbled.
All right. So is it in CLDR? Do the software applications support the language? I've kind of alluded to these. And then there are questions about speech recognition, text-to-speech. Machine translation gets you into the advanced categories. There are also questions about online presence. Are there websites and blogs available? Are there communities devoted to the language, defining it, evolving it? and perhaps is the language used for any specific purposes? We have in mind, maybe it's used for education, but nothing else. Maybe it's used for commerce. Maybe there's a local newspaper. So we want to kind of feather that out. And then move. And then, so also, are there efforts to digitize existing materials? Are there digital resources already available? So you get the idea. And bear in mind, as we collect this data, it can also be integrated with other data that the survey is collecting, which is population information, regional information, and so forth. And then the next steps, once we've submitted the proposal with all of the questions to UNESCO and the relevant committee, when they come back with whatever fine tuning they apply to it, then we can start to think about visualization tools and analytic tools to be able to work with the data. So these charts are just random charts of visualization. So anyway, I think we're there. We'll take some questions, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of issues with our approach to questions. Mark?
Yeah, I have a few things. One is that there's a level in between your basic and supported, which we talked about in the last talk. I don't know if you were here then, but is focusing on, can I use programs to create content in this language? And one of the examples is, can I make a spreadsheet and will it do dates, times, numbers?
Speak a little louder.
Can I use this in a spreadsheet and do the dates, times, numbers, sorting, etc. All the things that a spreadsheet needs is actually a really interesting middle level, because that gives you basic content. It also gives you a lot of the features that you want in a UI, but it's not a UI.
Right.
So I'd recommend having a center level in between your basic and supported, because that gives you a step to go to.
Yeah, I think some of that is there are questions about locale data. We haven't specifically talked about is the locale data used.
Yeah.
But we can take that into account.
Okay. Then some of the things that we have found really useful are things that are not widely available. For example, what are the statistics on multilingual use? A lot of the world is multilingual, but very few of the censuses, some of them do have this. The Indian census of 2010 was very good at saying, well, there are X many people are fluent in Hindi and English and Tamil. Y are fluent in Tamil and Hindi. Z are fluent in English and Hindi, etc. And that turns out to be really useful when approaching these design issues. The other is,
So
let me just go ahead and finish. I'm going to rattle these off and let somebody else ask a question. The other is the official status. What official status does it have in the country? Can I file an application to form a business in this language? Can I do a birth certificate in this language, et cetera, et cetera? And the last one, which is really hard for us when we get approached for CLDR, is what is the most common orthography and what are the other ones? Because when we collect the data, we don't want to give people ransom note orthographies. We want to give them the most common one and then progressively go to the less common ones. So the orthographies that are used with the language are also very important. Okay, so
all right, thank you.
I don't expect an answer to that.
Well, but I'm going to answer. That's not fair, Mark. So, but I want to make sure the part we're contributing is about, for a particular language, what level of digitization is it and how far to go. So questions about being multilingual and some of the other questions you bring up, they should be asked, they should be part of the other parts of this survey. But, for the piece that we're doing, We're just trying to say, well, if you know the language, where is it? How much support does it get? But I appreciate the suggestions, and we'll make sure that that gets introduced elsewhere in the survey. And I saw Peter had a question, and then we'll come back over here.
So I do have a question for you guys, but first Mark brought up something that I'll expand, respond, elaborate on. When you mentioned spreadsheets, my first thought was, well, of course, Mark thinks that's interesting because spreadsheets are an excellent scenario to reinforce the value that CLDR brings, right? But is that a scenario that people in digitally disadvantaged languages really want to make use of? And okay, so maybe they do, maybe they don't, I have no idea.
All right, let's going.
But it does bring up, I think, a really important question from a sociolinguistic perspective that has to do with language vitality, which is a key to language vitality is not only is the language being propagated through generations, which is a key thing, but also how many daily functions does a person do? Like, what are the daily functions that people use which languages for? Most people in the world are multilingual, and they use different languages for different purposes. And the purpose that they use this language or that language can have a very significant factor in how vital does that language remain. If the only reason I speak this particular language is to talk to grandma, that's very different from I'm texting all my friends in this. So spreadsheets are one of many potential uses that can be really important to language vitality. The question I had for you guys,
Question.
yes. So
We only have a few minutes, so let's try and keep them short.
the information that you're gathering, I'll characterize as language metadata. It's not data in a particular language, it's data about a particular language. And certainly when we talk about language data, you definitely get into potential concerns around data sovereignty. As you work with smaller language communities, are there sovereignty concerns around the metadata?
I haven't come across any.
Well, we have communities that don't want to participate
Yeah.
in sharing their language data or sharing their culture. That comes up from time to time because they're worried about dilution of their culture. They're worried about it being exploited and all of those things. So,
But do they have those concerns about saying, well, this is how many people speak our language and we have support, technology support to do this or that?
well, depending on who's doing the data collection, you can have those issues. This is being run by the government. And so I don't know what the situation would be in each country for each community. So maybe. Did you want to add to that?
No, the only thing I want to add is that we need to validate the data. So if the focal points are giving us X amount of speakers, and then we ask the focal points to validate it with the community, we then may have to have a conversation or a discussion or, you know, make decisions based on that. So it's a case by case situation.
And then
I have a quick question.
then you win.
Where would a person go to find the answers to these questionnaires? Can you repeat the question?
So you go to the world, once the data is collected or as the data is collected. So the question was, where do you go to see the results? And it's an online website, World Atlas. Do you know the full thing?
No, I think he was asking, where do you get the data?
Well,
No, I thought,
you have the questionnaire.
Yeah.
Where are the answers? Where do I go to look at the answers?
Yeah. Okay, so the focal points need to get these answers. So the obvious one is to go to their country census or statistic bureau. But that's not enough because that can only give one dimension. So they need to also, we're going to send them also to academic institutions. So they're going to start cross-checking the data. And then they're also going to have to check with Indigenous, or not Indigenous, minority language communities that are organized. If they're not organized, there's a list of things that they can go through, basically.
But I thought the question was, how do I see the results? And so there's a website for the World Atlas under the UNESCO domain, and you can go there. Now, we're in the process of, formulating, getting approval for the questions. Then it has to be put into the website, and this is going to be a process that takes, I was going to say months, but it's probably years, right? And so it will be available for anybody to view and drill down in at some point.
We can take one more question. Or,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, we should probably
He's been waiting.
Who? Where?
stop there.
Addison.
I can shout at you for,
If I don't like the question, I'm going to say time's up.
yeah, this I understand. Two really quick small things. One is sometimes you say Indigenous and sometimes you just say language. Is it strictly Indigenous language information that you're collecting, or are you trying to collect a full survey of language usage?
A full survey of languages. The reason I use Indigenous a lot is because that is where they are
For
not
the problem.
sized.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay.
we need the data.
The other real quick thing, at W3C, Richard Ishida has done a lot of work on the Language Enablement Index, and there's, I think, some interesting elements of whether you can present or observe a language or a script. And I think there's maybe interesting cross-pollination there. And I didn't see a lot about just strictly the presentational elements. Does it line break and blah, 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 blah,
Okay. All right. So I'll follow up with Richard. Thanks, everyone. As we mentioned, Translation Commons is a volunteer organization. So feel free to reach out and or contact me on LinkedIn, Texan. So.
And also, thank you very much for all the tips and all the suggestions. And please do follow up with us. And I don't think I know all your names, so I would love to follow up with each of you and have some of your suggestions incorporated and make sure that we address all these issues. You're the experts. You've done this before. So everything is welcomed.
So let's
Okay.
thank